And welcome back to the show. This is the Real Estate Zone, our weekly radio show about Central Texas real estate. This is a call-in talk show. Come and be part of the show. We'd like to answer your questions about mortgages or about Central Texas or any type of real estate out there, be it an investment property or even your primary residence. Give us a call at 836-0590. That's 512-836-0590. Don't forget about our Twitter handle. You can follow us on Twitter at Austin Daily. That's Austin Daily. Kevin, before we went into break, we were talking about the obvious disparity between the number of listings out there and the number of pending sales. And
right.
It's just such a tight ratio. Everybody knows this already. I guess the big question is, where do we go from here? What kind of changes are we going to have to make in Central Texas, and who's going to make those changes, number one, to bring enough supply to this demand that we're seeing right now?
So, look, this concept of sprawl and a city sprawling out, and Texas has a lot of available land. Austin certainly acts differently than some of our cities with pasture in every direction, but the concept of sprawl is hidden in these numbers as well. So I looked while we were on break at these numbers. What is our ratio for inside city limits of Austin? So we were talking about the whole MLS. That includes all the way out to Georgetown, into Kyle and Buda. Inside of city of Austin, we currently have 1822 pendings and 1714 actives. So we have crossed this line.
So there's actually more pendings than there are actives in
Right.
the city limits.
So there's less than a month of supply in all price ranges. Now, that didn't used to be true. The last time we took this sort of sub-search about a month ago, there were still more active than there were pending. And we had to redefine again to say, okay, under 400,000. So let's call it no super luxury. Then we were getting more pendings than there were actives. And now we've switched to where anywhere inside the city of Austin, if you are driving with a gambling friend and you see a for sale sign, it's a safer bet that it's under contract than it is available.
May the odds ever be in your favor.
If we point out the even tighter segment and say, okay, only under 400,000 inside the city of Austin, there are 712 actives, and there are 1,243 pendings.
So basically, anytime anything under 400,000 comes onto the market.
So now 2 out of 3 are under contract.
Right. So you have nothing to choose from, really, when you're out there. You have to be lucky. You have to be in the right spot.
Yeah, you essentially have to be first. It's not have to do with choice. It's about stumbling upon something that someone else hasn't seen before you.
So what's the solution here? Where do you see now? Number one, obviously, if jobs started creating and Central Texas economy started waning a little bit, we would see demand pull back. There are no signs of that happening with oil and gas reserves here in Texas. With what Austin has going on the technology side, I don't see the demand for housing wane in any period here in the next 18 months. So what's gonna break? What comes next? Yeah.
Well, so I guess pointing this out means that we can track on the health of the overall market, but we have a sprawl effect going in where really the dry spot on supply is concentrated inside city of Austin and in this under $400,000 price range, and this is starting to show up. Some people are noticing, some of our sources, we try to bring information to you, are noticing that the big builders, the production builders, and we many times would have a call, but by the way, this is a call-in show, 512-836-0590. But we've had callers say, well, why don't builders just build more, right? Where there's no supply, there's tons of demand. Where are the builders? Why aren't they building? And they are building out in the outskirts where there is available land, and that's why these ratios show a little bit of ability to, you do have a choice to some degree. Maybe it's only a choice between 2 homes, but it's not the sucking
in the outskirts, right?
In the outskirts, the bigger builders are now changing their models and they're picking up smaller parcels. So let's say
define a smaller parcel for a big builder.
Before what we call the downturn, or whatever we're going to call it, in 2008, when the credit crunch, so on and so forth. Before that, a D.R. Horton or a big production builder would take down a 500 or 1,000 acre neighborhood to create a subdivision. That was the small side. So that's how all their models work. Their economy of scale about how they could keep affordable pricing for first-time buyers was to buy a big piece of land, develop all the streets and neighborhood, and then
the cost of development is built into each one of the lots, and the more lots, the better.
Absolutely. So that means either you're pretty far away from town, if you want to get closer to town, and they're adopting their models to pick up some of these smaller parcels, smaller being 30 to 60 acre parcels that are not leftovers, but they've been passed over by big builders because they've been too small. So they're picking them up now, and they're doing smaller infill building, really cool stuff. But what this translates into is that now their land cost on the individual home, if they were doing 500 or 1,000 acres at a time, perhaps it was 20,000 an acre, right? That was their input cost, and then they'd have lumber and paint and appliances. Now on these smaller parcels, it's probably 60,000, 75,000 for each home, and what the land component of the cost is. And as you have so eloquently mentioned in the past, either that increase in cost gets passed on to the consumer, or they take it out of the profit margin. And are they going to take it out of the profit margin? Probably not. And perhaps there's not that much profit margin that could be absorbed anyway. So this contributes to continuing increased price. So so
they can bring something to the market, consumer a little bit quicker, but it's going to cost more.
It may be $55,000 more than what it costs in a big production size neighborhood. So that seems like a little bit more risky for the builder, right? And that's probably why they're only doing it in a market like this. So it's kind of refreshing, I guess, to see. All right, some of the bigger box builders not looking at nationwide scales; they're looking at MSA size scales, right? Right. And so this is one of the things that can accelerate that comps curve that we talked about a couple of shows back, which was prices can only go up so fast because you have to wait for comps to be established. Well, even in what we're calling a small scale, a 40-acre subdivision, very quickly 3 comps can be established, and perhaps 100 homes are delivered at this price point that's $50,000 or $75,000 higher than the surrounding resale neighborhoods. But this brings evidence.
You can't equate them one-to-one on that price, but it does suck up that appraised value.
If you're in perhaps a resale neighborhood just adjacent to that, and that was built in the 50s, but you're adding on 600 square feet, doing a down to the studs remodel and putting all new features, an appraiser may be able to take one of those new construction comps to show where the value point is.
All right, guys, let's go to the phones. Let's go to Boyd. Hey, Boyd, thanks for calling the show. You had a question.
I'm looking to purchase a home in the southwest of Austin, and I can afford over $400,000 up to almost $500,000. But I've had some discussions that the idea would be better to go ahead and duck under that $400,000 range, just in case 5 years down the road it'd make it a little bit easier to sell. What do you guys think?
Now, what was the reason they said you should duck under the $400,000? Because the type of financing that's available, like let's say conventional to jumbo loans.
They really just didn't get into a lot of detail. They just thought it would be better from the resale down the road, be a little bit easier to sell.
Right.
I won't have as much into it. It'll be easier for people to.
Well, I will tell you that that you start going above that 400. They might be talking about that luxury price point, right, where people start. It's never really going to be as cheap as rent would be, right? So if rent is X and your mortgage payment is X and they're the same, then it's that's a real easy decision to make. You're going to buy. But once you get to $500,000, rental rates aren't quite up to that, depending on your down payment, obviously. I think another thing to think about when doing that, and I'll let Kevin talk about the real estate investment side, is that when you get a conventional loan amount for a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, which is the easiest kind to get, the maximum loan amount here in Texas is $417,000. So that with a 3% down payment, you're looking around about $435 or something on a purchase price. So if you can keep it in there, that way when you go to sell it in the future, that somebody's going to easily be able to qualify for a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan, which is a larger buyer pool for you to draw from to get a good value when you're selling your house, as opposed to if you go higher than that, that's maybe somebody that's going to be in the jumbo range where they're going to have to put down 20% instead of 3% when they're buying your house. So that's definitely something to look at. Probably at that 430 range. Now, Kevin, what about on the investment side?
I mean, you nailed all the hot points. I'll expand to say that we have seen this division, and that's why in our earlier example we used 400 as sort of this line where there's a basic utility use of the home, and then there's a luxury component in the pricing. And we saw in the, quote, downturn that as people were tightening their belts and making adjustments, that boats got really cheap. Toys of all manners got really cheap, and homes that had some luxury component to them also had more downside or more hurt to the market than those that were priced, as John said, with equivalent mortgage payment to rents. So home as basic utility and function is much more protected. But then you're also right that we've seen at that 435 to 475 range somewhat of a gap, and even in the recovery, because if a buyer might just shave off 100 square feet of their target home to duck under that range and be able to put a minimum down payment down, or once they get to 475 or 500 or more, then that effect sort of wears off because it's not that they can duck down to get into 435.
Yeah, and Boyd, remember those Fannie Mae loan amounts change, or the conforming loan amounts change over the years as prices escalate in a certain area. They will adjust those. We haven't adjusted these in a few years though, and I don't see it happening for another few years. And I think it might be a good strategy for you, especially if you're thinking about exiting this property in about 5 years, to keep it under 435.
Now, I'll add in this specific submarket. So you were talking about Southwest Austin.
That's a whole nother animal over there.
There's a tremendous amount of land that's offline. It's not to be consideration for building of houses, right? So you're in...
It's all offline, period.
Period. It's in conservation ownership, right, because of the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, because of some different endangered species. And so there is just not this ability for a huge amount of homes to be brought into that specific submarket. That gives you extra protection. So even if we're seeing very robust sales, even in the 600s, 700s, into 800s in that neighborhood, because people aren't really scared of builders being able to replicate a huge amount of supply into that submarket.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
All right. Hey, Boyd, we appreciate you listening to the show. Thanks a lot. Hey, guys, you're listening to The Real Estate Zone. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.